Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining today. Our program today is part of the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and the program is titled You Are About to
No, I
Embark
still can't
Upon the
hear.
Great Crusade, and it's from the Eisenhower Foundation and the National Mall and Memorial Park. Our project partners are Internet2, the National Archives, and the National Park Service. We work together to put on this series every year from January through April. These are just a few quick reminders. By participating today, you are agreeing to be recorded and archived. We do keep recordings of all of our programs on our YouTube channel for teachers and students to access later. We're super excited to have you. We want you to participate as much as possible. So just a few thoughts about how to participate. So you can definitely use the chat. If you haven't found that already, it looks kind of like a caption bubble. Go ahead and find that. Make sure your name is what you want it to be. So that's how we'll kind of call on you. So you can change it to your school or however you'd like to be referred to. If you want to be on video and you're not already, you can put that information in the chat as well. And I can help you do that. And just a quick reminder, again, we want you to participate as much as possible. Just be really respectful of our tools. We want to make sure any questions or comments we're leaving in the chat box or over video are specifically related to what our presenters are speaking about. And I just want to thank you again for joining us. This is our website. If you are looking to access our future programs or looking for our recordings, you can find all that info there. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing and pass it back to our presenters.
Okay, I have sound. I can hear everybody and I can see everybody.
Yay!
Sorry about that. Therese, I can put the slides back up. I just need you to allow me to share screen.
Oh, I'm so happy.
You should be good to go, Helen.
Okay, great.
I was wondering how we were going to transition when
I know. I thought, I'll just keep clicking buttons. Isn't that the answer to most technology problems we have?
Absolutely.
Well, we are so excited that you all decided to join us today for our program titled You Are About to Embark Upon a Great Crusade. And that great crusade we're going to be embarking on is going to be in Washington, D.C., exploring two incredible monuments on the National Mall. Now, Jen and I are both kind of curious. I saw that some of you are from Idaho. If you would like to answer in the chat box where you are coming from, that would be fantastic. That way we can get a nice idea of where everyone is coming from around the country. And while you're doing that, we also would just like to introduce ourselves to you. So there's a little more connection. So Jen, you want to go ahead and take the lead?
Sure. Hi, everybody. You can hear me? Yay. I'm Ranger Jen, and I work in Washington, D.C. At the National Mall and Memorial Parks, which is a fancy name for the area in downtown Washington where you find the mall, the monuments and the memorials and things. And so I'm really excited to team up with Helen from the Eisenhower Foundation so that we can tell some stories and yeah, focus on something very important to her, which I'm not going to say because I'm going to wait till we get to it.
Okay, thanks, Jen. And you're right. Who is important to me is President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Okay, and since yesterday was President's Day, it's very fitting that you get to zoom in from your classrooms or from your homes to learn a little bit about our 34th president, General Eisenhower before he was president, and then President Eisenhower. So once we have some answers of where you're coming from, and we have people from New York, Virginia, Indiana, Buffalo. Man, I bet is it snowy up in Buffalo? It usually is this time of year, isn't it? Bowie, Maryland, all over. This is fantastic. Now, from there, from all these locations, I'm curious, and Jen's curious, what do you know about Dwight D. Eisenhower? Do you know nothing? This is an introduction. You've never heard the name? Do you know a little something? Are you pretty confident with your knowledge, or are you like a master on our 34th president, Dwight D. Eisenhower? Now, as you answer that, I will share a little bit about myself. Like Jen said, she's in Washington, D.C. I'm in Abilene, Kansas, where the Presidential Library and Museum is located for Dwight D. Eisenhower. And so we have his museum here, and we also have his archives here. So all the papers that when he was president, we have those nicely saved and stored here for people to do some research. And my job is super cool. I get to teach kiddos like you all about Dwight D. Eisenhower and what life was like throughout his times. So I'm curious.
We have a pretty good mix. We have a few who said absolutely nothing, a few who said they heard the name. Somebody said, I like Ike, which I thought was very clever.
I like Ike too. That was his big presidential slogan. So we're first going to start off with the World War II Memorial, and Jen's going to take us through the background of the World War II Memorial for us, okay? All right, to the next.
Off we go. Great. So I also saw someone knew that he was a general, and he was a general during World War II. So we have this World War II Memorial pretty prominent on our National Mall. And even Helen was surprised to learn when we first started talking about this, that the World War II Memorial has not been in Washington very long. It was built and opened up in 2004, which seems very, very recent for a war that was fought in the 1940s. And what's really kind of interesting about our war memorials on the National Mall is that for the most part, they've been built in opposite order of the time that they were fought in. So our most recent war that's currently memorialized is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and that was built and opened up in 1982. And it was a group of veterans coming back from Vietnam who said that it was really important to help heal the country from the Vietnam War era and honor those soldiers that fought and served. And so the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was built first. And then it was the Korean War veterans who fought in the 1950s who said, maybe we should have a memorial too. And theirs was built in 1995, opened in 1995. And then it came to the World War II generation. And you may have even heard the term, an author wrote a book calling the World War II generation the greatest generation. And there were so many people involved in the World War II, the war and all just surviving and living through that time, that finally in 2004, this World War II Memorial gets built. And you can see it, you're looking at it as people are walking through the memorial on this slide, and you're also seeing it from high up above. I have another slide, right, that shows kind of location. Oh, this is yeah, kind of at eye level, which is kind of fun. This was a bit controversial at first, which is really surprising because it is such a popular place to visit today. And it is such a treat for us to still be able to honor that greatest generation when the few remaining folks come to visit. But the idea of putting this memorial in the center of the National Mall at the beginning was really controversial, because you can see straight ahead in this photo, the Lincoln Memorial. And if you could turn around and look behind you, you would see the Washington Monument. And there were folks who were really, really concerned about blocking the view between the Lincoln and the Washington by putting the World War II Memorial there. Can we flip back once? Just, I promise I'll stop talking here, but this gives you a really good eye level view of this scene and how they solved the problem of not making it a disruption in the landscape. They put all the tall elements of the memorial around the outside so that you have that straight on view to Lincoln. And they also made it so that you walk down into this memorial. And they use this great statement here on this stone by saying that to kind of justify why it's important that it's here, Washington, the hero of the, you know, the 1700s, represented behind us, Lincoln, the hero of the 1800s, represented ahead of us. Why not the most critical event of the 1900s, World War II, should be here, right here in the center. And so that's why we have it located here. There's all sorts of great symbolism. I could probably spend the whole time here talking about that, so we won't do that. We'll point out a few highlights here. So the next shot obviously is the view from the Washington Monument, looking down on the National Mall, which I love to share. And you can see the water in the World War II Memorial at the edge of the reflecting pool on its way to the Lincoln Memorial. Can we go a little bit closer in?
Yeah. Hey, Jen, I have a quick question. Was this picture taken from within the Washington Memorial?
Yes.
Wow, that is really,
this
really
is
cool.
taken from the 500-foot level. Yes, being up at the top. So you can take an elevator ride up to the top of the Washington Monument and look out the windows, and that's where we took this picture from.
Wow, what a great view.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. There it is. That's the Washington Monument, if you're not familiar with what it looks like, in the background of this picture. And it's a beautiful day here looking at the World War II Memorial. Let me quickly just point out a few little things. We have on either side of the memorial, the big column, you see the big arch that says Atlantic. Yeah, we're sort of talking about oceans, but we're really talking about the theaters of the war, and how we had folks fighting in the Atlantic theater and the Pacific theater. So the fact that World War II is happening in two different places, there's those tall arches. And the smaller, I'm trying to point like you can see me pointing, but the smaller columns where you have all the little wreaths on them, yeah, those are all the state and territory columns. So those are to represent the fact that each state played a role. So if you come to visit, you can find your state's column, and each one has a wreath on either side. And there's two different kinds of wreaths. One is oak and one is wheat. And so they picked oak because they said that's for the industry and all the work we're going to talk about in a little bit that was going on to help win the war. And then the wheat was for the agriculture that was going to help win the war. And one of my favorite pieces of symbolism, I'll tell you here in a sec, Lakewood, every state does have one, and there are actually 56 columns because it includes all the territories that we had during World War II. So we have the 48 states that were in the country at the time of World War II. Then we have DC, District of Columbia gets a column, which it's very rare for DC to get recognized in a memorial like this. So that's very cool. And then it goes to Alaska and Hawaii, and then the other territories. And oh gosh, you could quiz me on those, but American Samoa and Philippines and Guam, and I'm going to forget somebody. So I'll quit now while I'm ahead. Yes, so we have oak and we have wheat. I do not have any idea what kind of oak they used. The idea of the oak is the wreath. My favorite part of the symbolism, though, is while they really wanted to show that the states all did their own part, so you can find your state represented here, they also wanted to show that they were united and that they worked together to work together to win the war. And so I'm wondering, it's really hard to see, but does anybody know what they use to represent the unitedness of the country and the unity, I guess I should say? What symbol they use to show? I see it because I know it's there, but I'm guessing if you don't know it's there, you're not going to see it. Oh, great guess. Yeah, the flag is a good example. The bald eagle, that is also a good one, but they and the eagle is represented under the Atlantic arch. There's a laurel wreath of victory that's being held up by an eagle. You all have some great guesses, and you're all very observant. I really I love it. Helen, can we put that cursor under the wreath, and at the bottom of the columns there's a piece of bronze that is connecting all the state columns together, and if you could see that up close, it is a rope. And so they literally use the idea of a rope to show that these state columns were tied together. So it was a way to show the unity of the country by tying the states together. Y'all had some great ideas there, though. Very, very good, good work there.
Yeah,
So
and I got excited. Sorry.
Yeah.
When you mentioned it's like the People's Memorial. I mean, it's the title is World War II, but it's really representative of all the people, whether it's the states and the territories, but also on all sides, Atlantic, Pacific, but also on the home front and fighting. So that's that really stuck with me.
And it's very different. The other two war memorials that we have, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and the Korean War Veterans Memorial. The name of this is the World War II Memorial. It doesn't include the name veterans because it's to honor anyone who served anywhere during that time, whether it was on the home front, whether it was in a factory, whether it was a young person like you guys, what you would have done to contribute to the war efforts, whether planting a victory garden or recycling metal to help for the troops. This memorial was built to honor everyone. So that's exactly right.
Very cool.
Kilroy. What a great story this is. So Kilroy, there's a lot of different reasons and a lot of different stories about how this design got started. But the idea of Kilroy was something that was really popular for the soldiers who were serving overseas. It was almost like a sign from home that people would sign their name or sign this little picture. See how easy it is to draw. And one of the stories says that it got started by someone who was checking things in a factory, and that was the way he marked it to say that he had been there and had approved that everything was okay. He wrote Kilroy was here and then added this little drawing, and it became this really fun thing for soldiers. Imagine that you're serving overseas and you haven't been home in a long time and you missed everything about being home, and you see this on a package or you see this somewhere and you're like, oh man, this reminds me of home and this makes me feel a little bit better. So funny story is, can you see in the top picture that this is sort of hidden behind this golden gate there? That's actually the gate that leads down into the pump room to deal with the pipes and take care of the water fountain. But the guy who was building this, helping to oversee the building of this, thought that this would be a great thing to include, that the soldiers, the veterans coming home would really get a kick out of this. And so it wasn't originally part of the design, but he had it snuck in the back there and hidden away. So this is something that's really fun to point out to people of all ages. I love showing students this because it's a really cool little thing. Maybe you want to Google the whole Kilroy was here and find out more about him. But it's a really, it's a really cool thing. And I've been here at the mall since before this memorial was built. And so it's a really neat story. I remember vaguely the guy who thought that this would be really fun to do. And no, he didn't get in trouble. I think it became a really good idea. So it's a cool part of our story that we get to share.
It's definitely a cool part. And I didn't know about Kilroy. I was doing research, just probably like many of you do research. And sometimes, you're looking for something specific and then you find something that you just weren't aware of. And that's how I came across Kilroy. And then Jen just, taught me even more. And I think Miles asked, was Kilroy a real person? Well, that's what's really interesting, Miles. It was a person. We don't really know who it was, though. There's so many stories and there's not a lot of evidence that proves it was one specific person. So it kind of, when I asked one of our archivists, he said it was kind of like a tag, okay, of what we would look at today with like graffiti. The soldiers would tag where they were. And then when the next soldier would come along, they would see that and it'd be like, it was a little smile in a really scary time. Okay, it was a little piece of home, like Jen mentioned, and it was just sort of a refreshing sight for them. So I was excited when I was doing my research to come across this little piece of history that I wasn't aware of, and that's what's so cool when you are researching history. And so that kind of leads us into our next part of the memorial is all of the quotes that are throughout the memorial. And when we think of quotes, and what I use a lot of here at the Eisenhower Foundation are primary sources. And I think that those terms, primary sources, whether you're in 5th grade or you're in 12th grade, I think you are probably familiar with it. But just as a reminder, it's going to be direct evidence from the topic or time period being studied. So the image of Kilroy is a primary source, okay? We have it was from World War II. So when we are looking at these quotes, they're going to be direct evidence. Okay, so let's check out our first quote. Now, World War II, we're going to have President Roosevelt is the president for the majority of World War II as our sitting president. And this is a quote from him. He said, "They have given their sons to the military service. They have stoked the furnaces and hurried the factory wheels. They have made the planes and welded the tanks, riveted the ships and rolled the shells." Wow. I'm curious, who do you think they is? Who is President Roosevelt referencing? Who is he talking about? Because as he's reading this, it's with great esteem. All right. Absolutely. We have the Army. Okay, that could be a possibility. Citizens of the US, we the people, soldiers. Man, great answers. But the overall answer that I'm seeing more of is women. And you're absolutely right. So generally, when we think of World War II, we tend to think of our male soldiers. And that's the history books. That's great. They were a huge contributing part to the war. But also, like Jen said, as being the World War II memorial, it was also the women on the home front. For when the men left to serve overseas, the factories still needed to be run. Manufacturers of tanks and of airplanes and ammo, they all still needed to be built and created. And so Roosevelt was saying, if not for the women on the home front, we wouldn't have won the war. And so during this time, back in the 1940s, this was a pretty big deal. This was a change in gender roles. Gender roles were still pretty common prior to World War II. In general, women stayed home and kept the house. Men went to work. The gender roles definitely had to change during World War II, and women went to those factories. They went to work, and they definitely contributed heavily to the victory of World War II. So let's move on. We have a few more primary sources I want to look at. That top one is a photograph. Photograph is another great primary source, and a photo can tell us so much without reading any words. Okay, so we see three women here, and they're dressed a little differently. Can you tell me how they look a little different? Are they ready to go out on the town? Do they look like a dressed up housewife? Are they going to be cooking in the kitchen? I don't think they're going to be doing any of those. You're right. They're wearing headscarves. They need to keep their hair pulled back. They need to keep it pulled back because if they're working a factory, they can't get that hair stuck into the machines. They're engineering. You got it. Their jobs are different. The two women on the outside, they would be working in factories, and a name we would refer to them as Rosie the Riveters, okay? They're going to be building war machines, ammunition. They're going to be wearing boots, jumpsuits, and have those scarves pulled back. The woman in the middle, she's going to be working more of a desk job, clerical, but still all these positions were very important. Now, some of you, they're showing muscles. Another primary source that with the showing muscles, the one in color, that's going to be an image of Rosie the Riveter. And she is showing her strength. We can do it. Women can do it. And so just another symbol of the time. Yeah, I see that we have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, Edgewood, go ahead.
What I was realizing is that they're like ready to do what their husbands had left off on when they had left for the war.
That's a great observation. They were eager because they felt how do you think you would feel if your husband or your brother or your uncle, they all left? We have to realize that every family in the United States on the home front had someone serving overseas in danger. So on the home front, whether it was a 5th grade class, whether it was a housewife, they all felt the need that they had to contribute to the war effort to bring those husbands home and those brothers. So whatever they could do. Great observation. All right, we're going to watch one more primary source. This is a fun one. This is original footage of Rosie's working in the factory. And it also has a fun little jingle that goes with it. And when I use the name Rosie the Riveter, it is in reference to all of the working women in World War II, specifically in the factories.
All the day long when the rain or shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie, the riveter, keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage, sitting up there on the fuselage. Little Fred can do more than American do. Rosie, the riveter, Rosie's got a boyfriend, Charlie. Charlie, he's a Marine. Rosie is protecting Charlie, working overtime on the riveting machine. When they gave her a production lead, she was as proud as a girl could be. There's something true about red, white, and blue about floating.
All right. Did any of you not dance during that? It's like I can't help myself. Yeah, I know. I see lots of hands. Yes, you can't help it. And you might even be singing it later this afternoon, which is awesome. So
Can I throw
Rosie,
something in real quick?
please do, Jen.
Oh yeah, a great song. You've got some fans there. You may have to like re-release that or something. I just wanted to mention that there's a national park in California that's called Rosie the Riveter Homefront National Historic Site. And so if you're really interested in this time period and this and the work that these women were doing, you should check out that webpage. Or if you're near California, Northern California, you should go check out this park because it's there's a whole park about this story. So I just want to throw that out there.
Great. And I had a quick question about the fuselage. It's going to be a small sort of bubble that the women, the very tiny petite women, could actually get into. And it'd be like the a tight place that they could finish the welding on part of the airplane. Okay, great question. So we're talking about World War II. We're talking about the women, but I work for Eisenhower. So where's Eisenhower's connection here for the memorial? Well, General Eisenhower was a 5-star general during World War II, which is a pretty big deal. He became the Supreme Allied Commander of the Expeditionary Forces, which is a huge title. And what it really means, though, is that he was the general for all Allied troops. Okay, so remember, it wasn't just the Americans, it was also the British and the Canadians. There was lots of Allied troops, and he was the general of all of them. And General Eisenhower led a really big operation called Operation Overlord. It was an amphibious invasion of Normandy, France, which means we had Allied troops coming from air and sea and eventually land. At this time in 1944, you had the Nazis taking over the majority of Europe, and the Allied troops needed to get onto the land. But how do we do this? So this very large operation was put together. It took about a year to plan. And then General Eisenhower decided when we would go. And this was a really big deal because we knew that lots of lives would be lost, but in the grand scheme of things, it had to happen. So we're going to listen to General Eisenhower read part of the quote that is on the World War II memorial, which is just kind of neat to think that this was a general and a sitting president, that we can hear his voice. Read the quote.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the Great Crusade, toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle.
So this quote that's written on the memorial comes from the order of the day that he sent out to every troop. So this is an example. This is a primary source of the order of the day, and he is trying his best to pump up the Allied troops to say, you are about to embark upon this great crusade, okay? Yeah, you saw it on the Kilroy, on the wall with Kilroy, yes. So that's the title of our whole program, because this great crusade was all of these Allied troops come land, sea, air. You are going to invade mainly in Europe, and you are going to restore civility, democracy, the free world. This was huge. And so this photo of this young soldier reading this order of the day from General Dwight D. Eisenhower, how can you tell, when I was doing my research, how can we tell this is the order of the day and he's not reading like a love letter from his girlfriend? how can we make that connection? Looking at the original primary source. Very good. Ooh, I have someone. Yep, we have some typed answers, but we have out of this, we have Edgewood. If you
Edgewood,
would
go
like
ahead.
to answer.
It has the same symbol on both the paper that he's reading and the one that's on the screen.
Great observation. It does have that same symbol, and that symbol stands for the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, so the head office. Great observation. We were victorious on D-Day, and so with that, the landing of D-Day, we did go very quickly through Europe to liberate or to rid the European occupation from the Nazis, and the people were free. Edward, I see you have another question.
Well, actually, there was a signature at the bottom of the letter, and it shows general signature.
Awesome. You got it. That signature in cursive. I'm surprised you got that. That's fantastic. And that was Dwight Eisenhower to his troops. Fantastic. All right. Now, just another quick quote to move on. We need to move on. Jen, we could probably go all day on this. From Culp Hobby. She also served within the armed forces, and she wrote, women who stepped up were measured as citizens of the nation, not as women. This was a people's war, and everyone was in it. So again, just more evidence that proved that women were looked upon more as equals and not as a gender, and then that it was a people's war as a whole. And to wrap up our quotes, towards the very end of the war, President Roosevelt passed away and President Truman took over. And so this is President Truman's quote: "Our debt to the heroic men and valiant women in the service can never be repaid. They have earned our undying gratitude. America will never forget their sacrifice." I get goosebumps when I think about that. So one way we never forget is by building memorials. And most recently, Jen mentioned that the World War II Memorial was built in 2004. We had the Eisenhower Memorial open up in 2020. And so we're gonna kind of shift gears from the World War II Memorial, but I am curious. Oh, we have a question here. How long was World War II? Well, we look at it from the Allied involvement from 1939 to 1945. But if you really want to get into your history, Hitler started to take over all the way back in 1933. Okay.
The United States didn't get involved until the really involved. We were sort of involved, but really involved in the end of 1941.
Mm-hmm. You got it. All right. So I'm curious, I mentioned several primary sources throughout the beginning or the first half of our program with the World War II Memorial. Can anyone tell me what was a primary source that you enjoyed the most? Remember, it's that direct evidence of a topic or time. What was your favorite primary source? All right, we have some saying the video. I know.
Hard to beat that music.
It is hard to beat the music, but yeah, understanding the women's contributions.
Oh, neat.
Letter from D-Day.
Looks like we have some Edgewood students. Edgewood, go ahead.
Kilroy.
Kilroy, yes.
All the quotes.
All the quotes. Thank you. All right. Well, we're going to be looking at some more primary sources as Jen's going to introduce us to the Eisenhower Memorial that opened up in 2020. So Jen, if you'd like to give us a little history on it.
Sure. Yeah, this has been, interesting because it was a long time in coming and there was a lot of conversation about the design of this memorial. It's a little bit different than some of our other memorials. As we build new memorials, they all kind of represent maybe the time in which they are built, as has always been the case. But you might notice this one isn't exactly in the midst of the National Mall, where where the World War II memorial sits. But the location of this is really, really pretty significant in that they found that by using this location, a lot of the places around this memorial directly connect to Eisenhower and the things that he did when he was president. So it's really neat. So if you've been to Washington, D.C., I was just going to ask, somebody's noticed that y'all are seeing the Capitol building, very observant. Yes, it's really close to the Capitol. And it's right across the street from the Air and Space Museum. And behind it, the big tall building, or the biggish building there behind it, is Department of Education. And these were things, NASA gets started when Eisenhower's president. So that's a big deal. Air and Space, tells that story. And we have education, which was important to President Eisenhower. So this location was really well situated to tell the story of his accomplishments as president. You might be wondering, like, what are these weird features? There are those two tall columns. One represents presidency, one represents his military career. So they wanted to tell both sides of the story. And a design, yes, we'll get to that in a minute. The design that's on that kind of thing in the back there. I think we have a better shot of it as we continue on. But yeah, they really wanted to capture the whole of Eisenhower's life in this memorial. So we even start when he was a youngster. Is that the next one?
Yeah, it sure is.
It's really an interesting piece.
It is. So Eisenhower he was actually born in Texas, but moved back up here. His family was originally from the Abilene area, and he lived here from the time he was 2 till the time he left for West Point Army Academy. And so this image, it definitely represents his youth. Okay. Now I want you to take some observations. I want you to tell me what you see. What is he wearing? What do you think he might be thinking? What is he looking at? Is he inside? Is he outside? Is he in school? What do you think is going on with this young man? Now, as you're coming up with those, you'll see that there's a quote in the background. And this quote, it's talking about, it's when he came home from World War II and he came back to Abilene. And he basically was like, I had no idea this is what I would become, because really I was just a barefoot boy. And coming from a small town with really high values of helping your neighbor and going to school and being just an overall really good person. Yeah, so we think he's outside. He might be thinking about war, casual clothes. He's working. And you're right, he's going to be outside. He's not thinking of war yet. If I had to guess, he might be about 10 years old. So it would be about 1900. This is before we're thinking about World War I. And so he's thinking probably about fishing. Okay, he's wearing overalls. He loved to spend time outside. And this is the primary source. Oop, we're going to skip that part. We're going to look at the photograph that this was used, the primary source photograph that this part of the memorial was used. And yeah, he might have been thinking about the future, but really when I see this primary source photo, I just see a young man. He was camping, and he would always finish up his chores Friday after school, and that his main goal was try to get outside to camp, to fish, to spend time with his friends, just the simple ways of life. And that's how he was raised. And he really kept those characteristics throughout his life of keeping it, sort of back to those basics and what his parents instilled in him of good work ethic, and to really enjoy the outside. Okay, so the first part of the memorial is going to be about his boyhood. Now, the second major part is going to be about his military career. And when we see this, we're going to have the general. He is the one in the hat, okay? And he's talking to troops, and these troops represent the 101st Airborne. And if we look at the date, we have in the quote, it says, "The tide has turned, the free men of the world are marching together to victory." And this is part of the order of the day. And General Eisenhower is talking to the troops that are going to jump out of airplanes onto enemy territory the day before. And he's, trying to give them a big pep talk. And my favorite part of this is that it comes from this photograph. Okay. So they use this photograph and he's talking to a soldier called Strobel. Okay. W. Strobel. And it looks real focused, and they're talking maybe war strategies, but they're not. What do you think they're talking about? Think about his boyhood and all the things he enjoyed to do. These troops are about to go into a huge battle. And here's the general coming to talk to them to sort of ease their minds, to calm them. He could be talking about family. That's very important. Encouraging them. What he is talking about, teamwork, is fishing. Can you imagine? He's holding his fist, almost like casting a reel, okay? And he's talking to those men whose eyes are glued to him about fishing. Because what better way than to get their minds off of what's just about to happen and to sort of calm them and ease them. So as a leader, he was really exceptional at leading and encouraging the troops, but also coming down and talking as another soldier to soldier. Again, and you can kind of see the order of the day that we used before. So we have boyhood, we have his military career, and then Jen, you want to talk about his presidential time?
Sure. Yeah, this is kind of opposite of where the military part is. We have him as president, and we really focused, they focused here on this, the idea of the working together with his cabinet, and the time that he was president in the 1950s represented a time of peace, which seems really strange because here we are just talking about him at a time of war. He's a general, he's fighting in wars. And yet during his presidency, it was an era known for peacetime. And so his cabinet workers, people who helped him achieve his goals during the presidency, are there to be representative of, the role of the president. Yeah, very observant, the map in the background, because he was really trying to stress that even though he was very involved in a war, that war is not a good thing. And in fact, I mentioned earlier the Korean War, which was fought in the early 1950s. He gets elected president, and one of the things he said was that he was going to, stop the war and put an end to the war in Korea. That was one of the things that he wanted to work for. Yeah. So interestingly enough, the gentleman with the briefcase is representing an African American. And that was done as part of this piece of artwork to think about Eisenhower's role in the civil rights movement. And there are maybe presidents who get more credit for civil rights activities, but Eisenhower was supportive of the situation at Little Rock, for instance, and making sure that the isn't it the same group that he was talking to in World War II that gets sent to Little Rock?
It was, yes, the same groups that
101st Airborne, yeah.
Yep.
So that becomes an issue. That one of the things, of course, in the 1950s with the the growth of the civil rights movement and being very active. So that's something that was consciously put here in this piece of artwork. All right. The tapestry. Yeah, somebody asked about this. This was a really unique, and I brushed up on this morning just so I could be able to talk about this. So here you see both parts, right? The war part, the Normandy part on the right, the cabinet and the presidency represented on the left, and then you have that big tapestry, which quite honestly is really best seen at night. I've seen it both, and in the daytime it doesn't really kind of do it justice. But the person who designed this memorial, his name was Frank Gehry, and he kind of drew out this idea. And believe it or not, the thing you're looking at in the tapestry is supposed to represent the hills at Normandy. And the scene on the right with the president or the general talking to the troops was wartime, right? Where they invaded at Normandy. What this is intended to show is Normandy at peacetime, to represent that Eisenhower as president was about peace. And so it's a really unique thing. Gosh, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. And of course I'm going to forget, but it's like 450 feet long. It's 8 stories high, the tapestry, and it's 600 individual steel cables braided together to create this design. And so, yeah, really interesting and unique, you know, something that that's different for what we usually see in a memorial. And we wanted to show you what it looked like from behind, just to give you kind of the sneak peek behind. And there's the daylight version, and maybe it is not as undramatic as I claimed it to be. It's kind of neat from the back, maybe during the daytime. But the building is Department of Education, which was, again, education. Hey, where would Eisenhower have been had he not gone to West Point? I mean, his whole life would have been a different, would have gone on a different course. And so the idea of education was always something that was important to him too.
Mhm. Awesome. Thanks, Jen.
Sure.
Before we open it up to questions, Miles did have a question when you were talking about Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yeah.
Miles, what's that? We're talking about Little Rock High School. And so you might want to do a little research, but it was talking about the integration of African-American students into an all-white high school. And the governor of Arkansas said, no, we're not going to do this. And he called in the National Guard to prevent that from happening. And this was that state versus federal authority. And the Supreme Court said that's illegal. And General Eisenhower said, you can't do that. And he tried to be diplomatic. He tried to talk to the governor. Don't do this. You can't do this. The governor wouldn't listen. So President Eisenhower sent in the 101st Airborne to escort those students, those 9 African-American students, into school for their safety. And they continue to do that for the school year. So definitely something to look into if you're interested in that. And so we're curious, we're open to questions. I know Jen and I are also curious of what memorial you are a bigger fan of. Was it the World War II Memorial? Was it the Eisenhower Memorial? We'd love to hear your thoughts and input.
We got some questions already. Did Eisenhower go to Little Rock or send someone from his cabinet? I don't think he ever went.
No, he just sent the forces in.
Yeah.
And yeah, to make sure, because again, it was a federal law. The Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, said this is the law, and so it will always override a state decision. Okay, we have lots of World War II.
How long was Eisenhower president? He served 2 terms. People liked Ike, and so he got elected to a second term. And after Roosevelt had served, or at least been elected, for 4 terms, eventually the law was changed that limited you to 2 terms. And so, yeah, 2 terms for Eisenhower. So 53 to 50, no, to 60, right? 61. Yeah.
And, you know, his wife, Mamie Eisenhower, played a contributing role into his election and re-election. Women had there was the largest amount of women that had come out to vote because the women's vote liked Mamie so much, Eisenhower's wife. So there's the I like Ike, but there's also the I like Ike and Mamie too slogan.
You know, there's another national park too, where I actually started off in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the only house that they ever bought, because he was always working for the government or the army, and they never had a house they could call their own. But you can go to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and you can tour the Eisenhower farm, and it's a very, very homey kind of place. You know, it's not fancy, it's not extravagant, but it's their home, and all of their stuff is there, and it's very cool. And you know, once he becomes president, he gets all kinds of fancy gifts from people. So they have this one room where they kind of show off all of their treasures from around the world, and it's kind of fun.
I saw one more. We have Ike's boyhood. That's his nickname. We have his boyhood home here on campus in Abilene, Kansas as well. So you can kind of see where he grew up. And I did see the question if he had any children with Mamie. They actually had 2 kiddos. Their first son, Dowd, he passed away as a toddler from an illness, but their second son, John, grew up. He actually followed in his father's footsteps. He went to West Point and was part of World War II, as well as a soldier, a photographer. And then he ended up having four children, Eisenhower's grandchildren, and three of them are still alive. And yes, Ike loved to paint. It was a big hobby of his, especially later on in his presidency and into retirement. And he became pretty skilled at it.
Any idea if Eisenhower had a pet kangaroo?
No pet kangaroos that I'm aware of, but
I've heard that one
he
before.
had some dogs. He definitely had some dogs.
And he loved the cows on his farm. He was very much about farming on the
Yes.
Gettysburg farm.
And you're right. Camp David was named after his grandson, David. It was originally called Shangri-La, which is sort of this like perfect place. And you think of it as fancy and affluent. And Eisenhower didn't like that idea at all. It was a place outside of Washington, D.C., where he could bring in other diplomats and world leaders, and they could sit down and talk without the hub and the bub of Washington, D.C. And he wanted it to be more like a camp. So he did. He named it after his grandson, David. Any other
That's
questions?
all. Yes, my
Mhm.
grandson did. David married
Julie.
Julie.
I
Yes,
believe
of
it's
course.
Julie.
Julie.
Yep. And they had, four kiddos.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, if we have no other questions, I just want to take a minute to thank everyone for coming. We so appreciate your participation and attention. And Jen and Helen, thank you so much for your time and all your wisdom. This was a really great presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you all
Great.
so much. It was great being with you.
All right. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
All right. Thanks. Have a good one. Happy President's
you.
Day.
Bye, everybody.